Hi everyone, welcome to our next step in understanding chess. We're going to be looking at the basic approaches to chess. Yeah, so before I start, I just want to talk about the game of chess itself. So, chess is not a game about guessing, it's not about luck. It's, I think, one of the games that is purely and completely out of thinking. And yes, some other factors may be taken into account, but it's mostly about calculating as many possibilities and variations that you can find in a given position in order to win. And the higher up in skill you get, the more calculations you will see. But before we work on any of these calculations, I think the most important thing is understanding the principles that are kind of the basis of chess. And we're going to be studying these very basic principles, and understanding that will help us in our future calculations and in our games. Yeah, so how do you put yourself in an easier position to checkmate? How do you put yourself in a more advantageous position? Well, I think we need to look at chess in terms of three parts: opening, middle game, and end game. And I think the most important part is probably the middle game, but we're going to be looking at the opening, and yeah, we're going to be looking at middle game next week, and then end game in the week after that, or possibly the week after the week after that. Yeah, so let's look at the opening. The opening is normally considered the first 12 or so moves in a chess game, and it's usually about expanding your position and developing your pieces. And the kind of idea is basically moving out your knight and your bishops as much as you can, and then yeah, and then kind of looking into these positions and adjusting accordingly. And the kind of position that you want to end up in is two pawns in the center, kind of grabbing all the center space, and then two bishops right here and the knights right here. Now the bishops, depending on whether the pawn is on e5 or e6 or d5 or d6, might want to go to other spots like here, here, or here. And all these are kind of according to the situation that the position that you particularly are in. And so it really is a matter of adjusting. But this is just the ideal position, the general principle behind it. And yeah, a caveat to this is that this is only for the very, very beginners like us. There are much more well-established and very technically rich historical openings like the Scandinavian defense, the Caro-Kann, the French defense, and all of these openings we will get to study in later series. But for now, I think this is kind of a basic principle that a lot of the historical openings also abide by, although they do have a lot of exceptions. And yeah, it's basically this kind of idea. And so an example that I brought was this, moving out your pawns and then exchanging a piece using the queen. This is normally you don't use your queen a lot, and I'm going to talk about the uses queens a bit later, but this is a particular opening that you could play. And I just wanted to emphasize that it really depends on the situation. You can't always play the same setup over and over again. It really depends on what your opponent is playing. You need to be able to calculate even when you're using very basic principles. Yeah, and something also to think about is to develop your pieces carefully and then castling your king to safety. Now, what is castling? You may have heard of this, you may not have, and it's kind of a not very famous chess rule, like en passant even, but it's when you can move your king and your rook in one move to look like this. And this is kingside castling. You can also do it with the rook on the queen side, like this. It's basically the same idea, but it looks a bit different. And this can you can only do this when there are no pieces between your king and your rook, and neither your king nor your rook have moved since the start of the game. If you have touched it, if your king has moved a single spot or your rook has moved a single spot, you cannot castle. Your castling rights are all gone, and it is not a legal move for you to castle. So you can only so when you're playing, you need to make sure that your king and the rook that you want to use later for castling has not moved. That is very, very important. And if you forget that, it might end up being an illegal move. Yeah, so in terms of kingside castling, you are doing it with the rook on the h file on this side, and you're basically moving your king to to the G file, and then your rook to the F file to look like this. On the queen side, you're moving your king to the C file and you're moving your rook to the D file. So you're kind of flipping them over. The king is going here, the rook is coming over here. Yeah, and when you're playing chess.com, how you can castle is basically give me a second. Oh, you can basically click the second circle. Sorry, I cannot stop this video in time, but if you see there will be a second circle right over here, you can click that and it will immediately castle for you. You just make sure not to click this spot right here because then it will just move your king over here and it won't castle. So yeah, it's important that you do castle because it moves your king to safety. As we will be looking more at the middle games, your king is increasingly vulnerable as it is in the center. And later, after you have castled your king, what you want to do is open up the center and attack the enemy king if it is still in the center, because the center is a lot more vulnerable to attacks. Um, yeah, because the pawns are all expanded and it's kind of empty, and you can have a lot of space to squeeze into your pieces into their position. Well, in a case like this, because the pawns are all protecting it and you've got a bunch of pieces here, it's very difficult for the enemy pieces to come near your king. So this is why you have to castle, and usually most people castle kingside. That's most of the castling that happens. Although you can castle queenside, and yeah, it's also once your enemy has castled, it's kind of important to think what game you want to play. And what I mean by that is when your enemy has castled, for example, kingside, when you also castle the kingside, the attacks you guys can have on each other is very limited because you cannot, for example, you don't want to expand any of these pawns, you don't want to move them too much forward because then your king is also going to become weak. So if your kings are castled to the same side, the game is going to be more slowly paced, it's going to be more safe, it's going to be more strategic, and a lot kind of boring in a sense. If you're castled on opposite sides, however, you can expand your pawns, you can kind of have a lot of dynamic with your pieces, and it becomes a more fast-paced and kind of more entertaining for the speculators kind of game. Yeah, and again, this is the ideal positions we have for beginners. This usually, I think, is the first 6 or 7 moves. And after that, what you want to do is move your queen, kind of activate it outside. You can move your queen to D2 or D3 in this case, or even like C2. And then you will move your rooks to the center as well. Usually what you want to do with your rooks is move it to an open file. And what I mean by that is a file that does not have any pawns. That is called an open file. And the reason you want to move it to an open file is because it can see more squares. If, for example, if let's say this pawn did not exist and I moved my rook here, then this rook would be able to see all these 6 squares, this whole thing. Well, when there is a pawn, you can only see these 3 squares. So moving your rooks to an open file helps you to really maximize the potential your rook has. Fundamentally, it's really about the kind of game that you want to play, how you want to utilize your rook, what kind of attack you want to launch, all depends on your particular situation. But again, the general idea is activating your queen and bringing your rooks to the middle and then connecting them together. So moving your queens like that, and then kind of moving your rooks to the center. Yeah, and just things to be careful about. Obviously, these have caveats and these kind of limitations, these kind of be carefuls, obviously are ignored in a lot of the um, historical ideas because they have their own reason, they have their own specific kind of logic behind it that just goes against general principles. But this is what I want to give you 3 things. First of all, always try to take control of the center when you are developing your knights, when you're developing your bishops. If possible, try to move them into the middle. So when you're, for example, when you're developing your knights, don't put them in squares like h3 or a3. These knights won't be as active and won't see as many squares. For example, look at this knight over here. It's seeing this square, 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 this square. It's seeing 8. But if your knight was here, it'd only be seeing 1, 2, 3, 4. It's half of what a knight in the middle of the board can see. And so, if possible, especially with knights, move them into the center of the board. Don't put them to the side. Don't kind of put them in passive squares like D2, for example. Put them right in the middle so they can engage in the action. Yeah, and in again in historical openings, some of them are going to have very clear reasons why not to. It's going to have a tactic behind it. But if you're using these opening principles without any other historical openings, then unless you have a clear reason why, do not put your pieces, especially your knights, in the edge of the board. Take control of the center. And why I say especially the knights is because with the bishop, the bishops can see very long diagonals. So it really doesn't matter where it is as long as it's in a place where it can see entire diagonals. For example, it doesn't matter if the bishop here is on g3, um, h4, e5. It's kind of all the same diagonal and the same spaces that we're looking at. Although this one actually is seeing this diagonal as well, but yeah, it doesn't matter as much as the knights. The knights are kind of very drastic, and it's very important that you don't place them in the edge of the board. Also, a kind of second idea is try not to move your queen unless you have everything all developed. And this is because your queen is so valuable that it's easily vulnerable to attacks. And when your enemy keeps attacking your queen, you don't have any counterattacks or other ways to defend it. You have to move your queen because it is so valuable. It is 9 pieces, 9 points, and that's where it's like three bishops or three knights. And so it just makes your development a lot harder as you have to evacuate your queen, and it's going to make you in a less advantageous position. Now, with the openings like the Scandinavian defense, they have a clear reason why, and they kind of teach you how to put your queen and how to avoid these attacks. And yeah, using your queen with those ideas in mind is completely fine. But unless you have a clear reason why, do abstain from using your queen unless you're all castled and all ready with your knights and your bishops. Yeah, and this is also a general principle. I think most openings actually do abide by this. Don't move your pieces backwards. Just don't, because unless you have a very clear reason behind it, you don't have to undevelop a piece that you've already spent a move developing. I've seen people kind of trying to avoid attacks by going back to the spot they came from, and that's wasting so much potential you had in the move, and I just don't think in a lot of cases you have a clear reason why. And this is different from rerouting. Now we're going to be looking at these ideas of rerouting, but um, a rerouting can be, for example, when a knight kind of wants to go to a different space. So then this knight might go here, and then it might go here to look at some attacks over here on the c5 square. That's a different thing from, for example, this knight going back to b1 and undoing all the developing that it has done. And yeah, generally just try to move forward with your pieces instead of backwards, unless you have a tactical reason why. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. These are just basic ideas and principles for understanding the openings of chess and navigating it before we go into the actual openings. I hope that helped. These are very deep ideas, kind of overwhelming, I know, to understand in like 14 minutes, but it's really going to help you immensely. And I try to make it as compact as possible. And I hope that you enjoyed it and you feel more encouraged to look into this. I hope that you go to Lichess, you go to chess.com, and play some games abiding by these openings. And you'll see that a lot of people around the 500, 800 ELO stage will be playing these kinds of opening instead of memorizing actual ones. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate all your support, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.